Have you ever imagined being called a useless burden by your own son in front of the entire family at what should have been a celebration of gratitude and love? That's exactly what happened to me, Evelyn Parker, at the Thanksgiving dinner that would change my life forever. 68 years dedicated to raising, loving, and sacrificing, and all I got in return was total humiliation and disrespect. But you know what I did the next day? I made a decision nobody expected, a decision that would reveal shocking secrets about my ungrateful son and his gold-digger daughter-in-law, secrets that involved much more than simple ingratitude. They involved betrayal, greed, and plans that would leave me with nothing. This is a real story, an emotional story, about an elderly mother who finally said enough and discovered that protecting herself didn't mean stopping loving, but loving with boundaries. What do you think I did that changed everything? But to understand, I need to tell you how it all started. You know that feeling when the floor simply disappears from under your feet? That's exactly what I felt that Thanksgiving night, sitting at the table I'd prepared myself with so much care. The house was full, the smell of roasted turkey filled every corner, and there I was, Evelyn Parker, a 68-year-old elderly mother who just wanted to see her family together one more time. But what should have been a celebration of gratitude turned into the most painful total humiliation I'd ever experienced. Mark, my oldest son, the one I carried in my arms, who I woke up at dawn to care for when he was sick, simply looked me in the eyes and said the words I never imagined hearing. "You're a useless burden, Mom." The silence that fell over the table was deafening, heavier than any scream. I looked around, searching the faces of my family for some sign of defense, of indignation, of love. But Jessica, my gold-digger daughter-in-law, just looked away, a discreet smile at the corners of her lips, as if all of this was part of some plan. The other children lowered their heads, uncomfortably moving their food around, pretending they hadn't heard anything. Nobody said a word. Nobody defended me. It was as if, suddenly, I'd become invisible, or worse, as if they agreed with that cruelty. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces right there, at that table I'd polished so carefully the night before. I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. Not in that moment. I swallowed the dry pain, squeezed the napkin between my trembling fingers, and remained silent. Inside, however, something was changing. A voice that I'd silenced for years, out of respect, out of maternal love, out of fear of losing my children, began to whisper, "You don't deserve this." And for the first time in a long time, I heard that voice. Really heard it. This was no longer the real story of a devoted mother who sacrificed eternally. It was time for a woman who needed to protect herself. I finished dinner mechanically, serving the apple pie I'd made since 5 in the morning, listening to the superficial conversations trying to disguise the elephant in the room. Mark didn't even look at me again. Jessica made a point of complimenting the food, but her words sounded hollow, calculated. When everyone finally left, leaving only the mess and the echo of that terrible phrase, I sat in the porch, rocking chair, and looked at the stars. The farm was silent. Only the wind in the trees broke the quietness. And it was there, in that silence, that I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't tell anyone anything that night. I didn't call to complain, didn't send messages asking for explanations. I just retreated to my room, that same room where I cried when my husband died, where I spent sleepless nights when my children got sick. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized I dedicated my entire life to people who, apparently, didn't value my sacrifices. But something inside me had awakened. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was something deeper, more necessary. It was the instinct for emotional survival. And while the house fell asleep around me, my mind worked, planning the first step of a journey I didn't even know I needed to take. Have you ever felt completely discarded by those you love most? It's a different kind of pain, you know? It's not physical, but it corrodes from the inside, slowly, like rust on old metal. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment, every word, every look. Mark hadn't said that in the heat of an argument. No, he'd said it coldly, with conviction, as if he'd been thinking it for a long time, as if I really were a weight in his life. And the worst part? Nobody had defended me. Not my daughter Lily, who'd always been more sensitive. Not my middle son, who owed me so much. Absolutely nobody. And it was in that moment I understood. If I didn't defend myself, nobody would do it for me. The early morning was long and cold. I got up several times, walked through the empty house, touched the family portraits decorating the walls, photos of birthdays, graduations, happy Christmases. Had all of that been a lie? Had my ungrateful son always seen me this way? As a burden? The questions hammered in my head without rest. I made chamomile tea, the kind my mother used to make when I was a child and needed to calm my heart. I sat in the kitchen, watching the steam rise from the cup, and a strange clarity took over me. I couldn't control what Mark thought or felt, but I could control how I'd react from there on. When the clock struck 4 in the morning, I got up with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I put on my robe, slipped on my slippers, and went to the small writing desk in the living room where I kept important documents. I picked up the phone and, even though it was so early, called a number I hadn't used in a while. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Evelyn, everything okay? It's 4 in the morning." It was David, my old locksmith friend, who'd worked with my late husband. "David, I need you to come here this morning as early as possible. I need to change all the locks on the house." There was a pause. "All of them?" "All of them." While I waited for dawn, I made strong coffee and started gathering all the spare keys scattered around the house over the years. Keys under the porch vase, inside the cookie jar, hanging in the barn. Each one represented an open door, unrestricted access to my life, to my peace, to my dignity. My children had always been able to enter whenever they wanted, take what they needed, even rummage through my things without asking. But that morning, looking at that handful of worn metal, I understood I'd given too much access, trusted too much, exposed myself too much, and this emotional story was just beginning to take shape. But what I didn't know yet was that simple decision to change locks would trigger a series of events that would reveal truths I never imagined discovering. The sun hadn't fully risen when David arrived with his white van and that expression of someone who knew not to ask questions. He'd known me for over 30 years, had seen my husband pass away, had helped me through so many difficult moments. He just nodded when I opened the door and said, "Let's start with the main entrance." While he worked, I made more coffee, watching through the window as the farm slowly woke up, the first rays of sun touching the fields that my husband and I had cultivated together for decades. There was something symbolic about all of this, you know? Each old lock that David removed was like pulling out a piece of pain, of humiliation, of accumulated disrespect. I walked through the house while the sound of the drill echoed through the rooms. Each door, each entrance, each access was being transformed. The front door, where Mark used to enter without even knocking. The back door, which Jessica used when she came to visit, but actually to snoop through what I had. The garage door, where my children stored things they didn't want anymore, but also didn't bother to discard. All of them, one by one, receiving new locks, new secrets, new barriers. And with each click of metal being installed, I felt my heart a bit lighter, a bit more protected, as if I were building walls around a part of me that had been bleeding for too long. "Evelyn, are you sure about this?" David finally asked when he was installing the last lock. He looked at me with those worried eyes, full of a genuine kindness I hadn't seen in a long time. "I am, David, more sure than I've been about anything in recent years." My voice came out firm, surprisingly strong. He nodded, respecting my decision without judging, and continued working. When he finished, he placed all the new keys in my hands. They were heavy, shiny, still smelling of new metal. "These are only yours now," he said. And in that moment, holding that set of keys, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: control over my own life. After David left, I locked all the doors from the inside and simply breathed. The silence of the house seemed different now, safer, more mine. I went to the kitchen and started cleaning up the mess that still remained from the Thanksgiving dinner. Each plate I washed, each pot I put away, was like erasing traces of that horrible night. My ungrateful son had called me a useless burden, but there I was, an elderly mother taking care of her own house, her own dignity, taking the reins of a situation that had gotten completely out of control. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done, didn't call to warn them, just let the silence speak for me. Throughout that morning, I cleaned the house in an almost ritualistic way. I dusted the furniture, swept every corner, organized every pillow. It was as if I were preparing a new beginning, cleaning not just the physical dirt, but the emotional dirt too. I looked at the portraits on the wall once more. All those smiles, all those happy memories. Had it all been real? Or had I lived in an illusion, believing my sacrifices were valued when in reality they were just expected, taken for granted? The doubt hurt, but the certainty that I needed to protect myself hurt less than continuing to be treated that way. At the end of the afternoon, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The farm was beautiful, as it always had been. The trees we planted when the children were small were now giants, offering generous shade. The fields we plowed together, my husband and I, still produced. This land had history, had life, had value, and so did I. For years, I felt like this farm, always giving, always producing, always serving. But nobody takes care of land they don't value. And in that moment, looking at the horizon, I understood I needed to value myself first, before expecting others to do so. My phone vibrated a few times during the day. Messages from Mark asking about, I don't know what. I ignored them. Messages from Jessica with some request, disguised as kindness. I deleted them. For the first time in decades, I wasn't immediately available to solve problems that weren't even mine. I was too busy taking care of myself, protecting my space, establishing boundaries I should have established long ago. And you know what's most interesting? I didn't feel guilty. Normally, I would have felt terrible for not responding, for not being available. But this time, I just felt peace. When night fell completely, I locked the front door with the new key and felt the different click, firmer, more definitive. I went up to my room, and for the first time since that horrible dinner, I managed to breathe deeply without feeling my chest tighten. The new locks weren't just about physical security. They were about respect, about dignity, about teaching that the door to my life, just like the door to my house, would only be opened for those who knew how to care for what was on the other side. And if my own son didn't understand that, then he needed to learn the hard way. But I didn't imagine Mark would come back so soon, and much less in the way he would come back. Because what happened in the following days showed me that that total humiliation at Thanksgiving dinner was just the tip of the iceberg of something much bigger, much more painful, that was yet to come. 3 days. That's all it took for Mark to show up again. I was in the kitchen preparing my lunch, something simple, just vegetable soup, when I heard the unmistakable sound of his car on the gravel driveway. My heart raced immediately, that mix of fear and anxiety every mother feels when she knows a confrontation is about to happen. Through the window, I saw him get out of the car with that confident, almost arrogant posture, carrying an empty box in his arms. He didn't even look at the house properly, just walked straight to the door like he always had, as if that place were still his, as if he had every right to come and go as he pleased. I heard his key turning in the lock, once, twice, 3 times, and then silence. Then the sound of the key being forced, that metallic sound of growing frustration. "What the hell?" I heard him mutter from outside. I kept stirring my soup, my hands trembling slightly, but maintaining the rhythm. He knocked on the door, first softly, then harder. Mom, open this door. The key isn't working." His voice had that tone of irritation I knew so well, that impatience he always showed when things didn't go exactly as he planned. But this time, I didn't run to solve his problem. I turned off the stove, took a deep breath, and walked to the living room window. I opened just the curtain, enough for him to see me, but I didn't open the door. Mark was there, standing on the porch I'd swept that morning, his face red with anger. "Mom, what's going on? Why isn't the key working?" He spoke loudly, almost shouting. "I changed the locks, Mark." My voice came out calm, calmer than I expected. I saw his expression change, confusion, then indignation, then pure fury. "You did what? What do you mean you changed the locks? This house is mine too." I closed the curtain and went back to the kitchen, leaving him outside. The screaming started then. Words a mother should never hear from her own son. He called me ungrateful, crazy, manipulative, said I was trying to punish him for an innocent comment at dinner. Innocent. That word made me laugh bitterly as I served myself soup. Calling me a useless burden in front of the entire family was an innocent comment? The total humiliation I felt that night was just nonsense I was exaggerating? While I ate, I heard him pounding on the door, pacing back and forth on the porch, talking on the phone probably with Jessica, that gold-digger daughter-in-law who was certainly loving all the drama. Each insult he yelled from outside was like a knife in my heart, but it was also a confirmation. Confirmation that I'd made the right choice, because a son who really cared, who really loved his elderly mother, wouldn't react like this. He'd knock on the door with concern, ask if I was okay, try to understand why I'd made that drastic decision. But no, Mark was furious because he'd lost access, control, the ability to come and go from my life as if it were a hotel. And that told me everything I needed to know about where I really was on his list of priorities. "Mom, you can't do this. I have things in there, important documents. You're being ridiculous." He kept yelling, and I kept silent, sitting at the kitchen table, eating my soup that was now getting cold. Tears ran down my face, silent, painful, because even knowing I was doing the right thing, it still hurt. It hurt to see my son, that baby I rocked, that boy I taught to ride a bike, that young man I helped graduate, standing outside my house screaming as if I were his enemy. But I couldn't give in, not this time, because if I opened that door now, I'd be saying it was okay for him to disrespect me, humiliate me, treat me like trash. After almost an hour, the noise finally stopped. I heard his car start forcefully, throwing gravel everywhere. The silence that followed was deafening. I washed my bowl, put away the pot, and went to the living room. I sat on the couch and simply cried. I cried for the broken relationship, for the pain we were both feeling, for the family that should have been my support network, but had become my source of suffering. I cried for the son I'd lost somewhere along the way, who'd transformed into a man I didn't recognize anymore. But in the midst of all those tears, there was something more. There was strength. There was dignity. There was a mother who had finally said no, who had established a boundary, who had chosen her own well-being above the convenience of others. And as the afternoon fell over the farm, bringing that golden light I'd always loved, I understood this was just the beginning of a much more difficult journey. Because Mark wasn't the type to accept a no easily. And this emotional story was far, very far from over. That night, as I checked all the doors and windows before sleeping, holding my new keys as if they were a protection talisman, I couldn't help but wonder, did I do the right thing? Does a mother have the right to lock the door on her own son? But then I remembered those words, useless burden, and I knew, yes, I'd done the right thing. Because before being a mother, I was a person, and every person deserves respect, even from their own children, especially from their own children. The house was too quiet in the following days. That kind of silence that weighs on your shoulders and makes every second seem like an eternity. I decided I needed to keep busy, so I started doing what I'd postponed for years, a deep cleaning, the kind that goes through every corner, every drawer, every forgotten piece of life. That's when I went up to the attic, that dusty space full of boxes holding decades of memories, that I found something that made my heart stop for a moment. An old shoebox, faded, with my name written on the lid in Mark's childish handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it, as if they knew what was inside would change something in me. Letters, dozens of them, colorful drawings, crumpled notes, handmade cards with glitter that still shone faintly after so many years. I sat on the dusty attic floor and started reading, one by one, while tears blurred my vision. "Dear Mommy, when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you forever. I promise. With love, Mark, 7 years old." The shaky handwriting, the heart drawn beside it, the purity of those words cut me like glass. Where was that boy now? Where had that promise to take care of me forever gone? How had that ungrateful son who called me a burden once been this child full of love? I kept reading, unable to stop even feeling the pain increase with each word. There was a Mother's Day card where he'd written, "You're the best mom in the whole wide world. Thank you for everything you do for me. I love you more than the sky." I remembered that day. He was about 10, had saved his allowance for weeks to buy me a bouquet of wilted flowers from the corner, but to me, they were worth more than gold. Where was that gratitude? When exactly had it transformed into resentment, into indifference, into that cold look he gave me at Thanksgiving dinner? I also found old photos stuffed between the letters. Mark as a child in my lap, smiling with those missing little teeth. Mark as a teenager, hugging me on his high school graduation day, whispering, "Thanks for everything, Mom," in my ear. Mark as an adult, on his wedding day with Jessica, kissing me on the forehead and saying I'd always be his priority. Lies. All lies? Or had that been true at some point and simply got lost along the way? I held the photos against my chest and let the crying out, loud and painful, because there in the attic nobody could hear me. Nobody would judge me for this momentary weakness. But in the midst of all that pain, something strange happened. The more I read, the more I looked at that evidence of a love that once existed, the stronger my certainty became that I'd made the right choice. Because if that boy who wrote these letters really existed, if that son who promised to take care of me forever was there somewhere buried under layers of selfishness and ambition, then he needed this lesson. He needed to understand that love isn't just pretty words on cards, but actions, respect, consideration. And if he couldn't give me that anymore, then I needed to protect myself, even if it meant distancing myself from him. I carefully organized all the letters back in the box and came down from the attic with it in my arms. I placed it on the living room table and just stood there, just looking, processing. My elderly mother, my grandmother before me, they'd all kept things like this. Memories of when children were small and love seemed simple and unconditional. But had they also faced this pain? Had they also felt this sense of having given everything and received so little in return? The difference is they never talked about it, just accepted it as part of maternal duty. But I couldn't do that. Not anymore. I made tea and sat with the box, rereading some specific letters that had always been my favorites. There was one where Mark, about 12 years old, had written apologizing for breaking my favorite vase-playing ball inside the house. "I know you work hard to have nice things, Mom. I'm sorry for being careless. I'll fix it. I promise I'll be more careful with your things and with you." He'd fixed the vase, had gathered every little piece and glued it with such patience. Where was that Mark now? When had he stopped caring about fixing what he broke? The phone rang, pulling me from that trance of memories. It was an unknown number. I answered hesitantly. "Evelyn Parker?" The voice was formal, professional. "Yes, that's me. This is from Lawyer Thompson's office. Your son Mark was here today asking some questions about the farm property. I thought you should know." My blood froze. "What kind of questions?" There was a pause. "Questions about property transfer, about your mental state, about power of attorney. Mrs. Parker, I think you should come to my office as soon as possible." I hung up the phone with trembling hands. I looked at the box of letters, at all those promises of eternal love and unconditional care, and something inside me broke in a different way. It wasn't just pain or disappointment anymore. It was betrayal. My ungrateful son wasn't just disrespecting me, humiliating me in public. He was planning something involving my property, my farm, my life. And suddenly, those changed locks seemed like very little compared to what I really needed to do to protect myself. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake thinking about how I'd gotten to this point, how an emotional story of maternal love had transformed into a battle for emotional and apparently also financial survival. And while the moon illuminated the room through the window, I understood that the painful memories from that box weren't just about the past. They were a warning about the present and about the future I urgently needed to protect. I didn't wait for dawn. At 7 in the morning, I was already dressed, car keys in hand, and a determination I hadn't felt in years. The lawyer's call had kept me awake, but it had also given me something I'd been needing: clarity. I drove to Mr. Thompson's office with my heart racing, passing through those familiar streets I'd known since I moved to this town over 40 years ago. Every corner brought a memory. The bakery where I bought fresh bread for the boys' breakfast, the school where I took Mark hand in hand, the little park where he played while I chatted with other mothers. Everything seemed so distant now, as if it belonged to another life. The office was small but cozy, smelled of coffee and old paper. Mr. Thompson received me with that serious expression lawyers have when they know they need to give bad news. "Mrs. Parker, thank you for coming so quickly. Please have a seat." He pointed to the worn leather chair in front of his desk. I sat, clutching my purse on my lap as if it were a shield. "What exactly did my son ask about the farm?" My voice came out firmer than I expected. The lawyer sighed, adjusted his glasses, and opened a folder. "He wanted to know about the property transfer process, about how to proceed if you were no longer..." In condition to manage your assets. The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. Not in condition? He said, I'm not in condition? I felt my face heat up, the total humiliation coming back with renewed force. Mr. Thompson raised his hand in a pacifying gesture. He didn't say that explicitly, but his question suggested he was exploring options. He also asked about how long it would take to sell the property if it were in his name. Sell. The word echoed in my head. My son wanted to sell the farm. The land where his father was buried, where he and his siblings had grown up, where every tree held a story of ours. I took a deep breath, trying to control the anger rising in my throat. Mr. Thompson, I need to ensure nobody can do anything with my property without my express authorization. What do I need to do? He opened a small smile, almost proud. Exactly what I was hoping to hear. Let's start preparing some documents. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing paperwork, signing forms, establishing protection measures that should have been done years ago. With each signature, I felt a layer of vulnerability being removed, replaced by a legal armor that Mark wouldn't be able to penetrate. The night was long and full of nightmares. I dreamed about the farm being demolished, about strangers walking through the fields my husband had cultivated with so much love, about the house empty and abandoned. I woke up at 5 in the morning sweaty and with my heart racing, but also with a strange clarity. If Mark and Jessica were willing to go that far, I needed to be prepared for anything. I put on my best outfit, that navy blue set I only wore on important occasions, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me had deep, dark circles, but her eyes shone with a determination I hadn't seen in years. This elderly mother would no longer be a victim. I arrived at the bank as soon as the doors opened, at 9 o'clock sharp. The manager, Sarah, a young woman who'd always been kind to me, received me with a smile that quickly turned to concern when she saw my expression. Mrs. Parker, is everything okay? You look worried. I sat in the chair in front of her desk and took a deep breath. Sarah, I need to check all the transactions in my account for the last 6 months. And I also need to know if anyone tried to make any requests using my information. I saw her expression change, that professional concern bankers have when something's wrong. She typed on the computer for a few minutes that felt like hours. The silence was broken only by the clicking of the keyboard and the humming of the air conditioner. Then she stopped, frowning. Mrs. Parker, there's a loan request here from 3 weeks ago, $50,000. My blood froze. I didn't request any loan. Sarah nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard. I know. That's why it was denied. The signature didn't perfectly match what we have on file, and there were some inconsistencies in the documents. But someone tried, using your name, your information, even copies of what appeared to be your personal documents. I felt the world spin. Who? Who made the request? But deep down, I already knew the answer. Sarah hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. The request was made in person, and the person who came identified himself as your attorney. He presented documents saying he had authorization to act on your behalf due to your debilitated mental condition. The words hit me like stones. Debilitated mental condition. Mark had tried to make me appear incapable, crazy, incompetent, and he'd tried to steal $50,000 from me in the process. My ungrateful son wasn't just disrespectful. He was a criminal. Sarah, I need you to completely block my account. Nobody except me can make any transactions, any requests, anything. My voice trembled, but I remained firm. And I need copies of all the documents from this fraud attempt. Everything. She nodded, already grabbing forms. I'll do more than that. I'll put a fraud alert on all your accounts and I'll report this attempt to the proper authorities. Mrs. Parker, this is serious. It's attempted identity theft and bank fraud. The total humiliation I felt at Thanksgiving dinner now seemed small compared to this financial betrayal. We spent the next few hours filling out paperwork, changing passwords, establishing security protocols. Sarah explained each step to me, each protection being put in place. From now on, any transaction over $1,000 will require your physical presence here at the bank, with original ID and a password only you know. She handed me a paper. Choose a password nobody else would know, not even family. I chose the date my husband proposed to me, a day only we two knew, that we never shared with anyone. It was painful, but safe. When I was almost finishing, Sarah showed me something on the computer. Mrs. Parker, look at this. There have been several balance inquiries on your account in recent months. They weren't transactions, just inquiries, and they all came from the same IP address. She pointed to the screen. I recognized the address immediately. It was Mark's house. He'd been monitoring my account, watching how much money I had, probably planning this scam for months. Every concerned visit, every casual question about my finances had been part of a bigger plan. This real story was revealing itself to be darker than I'd ever imagined. "There's more," Sarah continued, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to tell me. "The person who came to request the loan. He mentioned the farm would be used as collateral. He said you were planning to move to a nursing home and the property would be sold to cover costs." Nursing home. They'd planned everything. First make me seem mentally and emotionally unstable, then force me out of my own home, and finally sell the farm and keep all the money. Mark and that gold-digger daughter-in-law had orchestrated everything with a coldness that made me question if I really knew my son. I left the bank with a thick folder of documents, irrefutable proof of the fraud attempt. I sat in the car and simply cried. It wasn't just sadness, it was grief, because the son I knew, who I promised to love unconditionally when he was born in my arms, that son had died at some point. In his place was a stranger capable of lying, manipulating, and stealing from his own mother. How had it gotten to this point? Where had I gone wrong? Or maybe I hadn't gone wrong. Perhaps some people simply choose the wrong path, no matter how much they're loved. I called Mr. Thompson straight from the bank parking lot. "I need to see you today, now." My voice was different, harder, more decided. He must have sensed the urgency because he said, "I'll be waiting." I drove to his office with the folder of documents on the passenger seat, that physical weight being almost a symbol of the emotional weight I carried. But there was also something more. There was strength, because now I had proof. It was no longer just my word against his. It was black and white, documented, irrefutable. And this emotional story was about to take a turn Mark would never expect. Mr. Thompson examined each document with the attention of an experienced lawyer. When he finished, he took off his glasses and looked at me with a seriousness that made me sit up straighter. "Mrs. Parker, with this evidence, you have grounds not just to protect your assets, but also to sue for attempted fraud. This is a crime." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I know, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Nobody's going to treat me like I'm invisible, incompetent, or disposable anymore. Not even my own son." He opened a small smile, almost proud, and began preparing the necessary documents. The battle was just beginning. When I was about to leave, Mr. Thompson hesitated. "Mrs. Parker, there's one more thing I think you should know." My heart sank. Mark didn't come alone. He was accompanied by his wife and a real estate agent, Jessica. Of course, that gold-digger daughter-in-law was behind this. Suddenly, everything made sense. The exchanged looks during Thanksgiving dinner, that discreet smile when Mark humiliated me, the increasingly frequent visits in recent months, always asking about the expensive maintenance of the farm. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the property value. I left the office feeling a confusing mix of anger, sadness, and strangely, relief. Relief, because now I knew the truth. It wasn't just disrespect or ingratitude. It was pure and simple greed. My ungrateful son and his wife wanted my land to solve their financial problems, and they didn't care about destroying me emotionally in the process. The humiliation at dinner hadn't been a moment of uncontrolled anger. It had been strategy, make me appear unstable, dependent, incapable to then gain control over my assets. What a painful, real story this was becoming. I drove to the farm slower than normal, needing time to process all of that. When I arrived, the first thing I saw was Mark's car parked at the entrance. And not just his. Jessica was there too, and a man in a suit I didn't know holding a clipboard. They were walking around the property, pointing to the barn, to the fields, clearly evaluating. They hadn't even noticed I'd arrived. I stayed inside the car for a moment, just watching, seeing my son and that woman planning the future of my property as if I were already dead. I took a deep breath and got out of the car, slamming the door hard enough to make them look. The expression of surprise on Mark's face quickly transformed into something between guilt and defiance. "Mom, I didn't know you'd gone out." He tried to smile, that fake smile I'd started to recognize. "Clearly," I replied, walking toward them. The real estate agent looked uncomfortable, looking from me to Mark as if expecting an explanation. "What are you doing here?" My voice was calm, dangerously calm. Jessica took a step forward, always the manipulator. Evelyn, we were just evaluating some options. You know, this farm is too big for you to take care of alone. Options? I crossed my arms. What kind of options exactly? The ones you were discussing with the lawyer? The ones involving selling my property behind my back? I saw Mark's face pale. He didn't expect me to know. Mom, it's not like that. We're worried about you. This farm is becoming a burden for you to manage, and we thought maybe— A burden? I cut him off. The irony didn't go unnoticed. Like your elderly mother, you mean? That useless burden you mentioned at dinner? The silence that followed was heavy. The real estate agent, sensing the climate, mumbled an excuse and ran to his car. Jessica tried to argue, but I interrupted her. You two are going to leave my property now, and don't come back without being invited. Mark took a step forward, the mask finally falling. You can't do this. I'm your son. I have rights. Rights? I let out a bitter laugh. You lost any rights when you decided my dignity and well-being were worth less than a few dollars. Now leave. They hesitated, but something in my look must have shown I was serious. As they walked to the car, Jessica whispered something to Mark, and he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't love or concern. It was pure anger at having lost control. When they finally left, leaving only the dust raised by the tires, I went inside the house and locked the door. My legs were shaking so much I had to sit on the couch before falling. The truth was clear now, crystal clear and painful. My son didn't see me as a mother. He saw me as an obstacle, and this revelation, as devastating as it was also liberating, because now I knew exactly what I was fighting against. And this emotional story was far from over. I didn't have to wait long. Mark showed up 2 days later, earlier than expected, as if he knew time was running out. This time he didn't try to enter through the front door. He appeared from the side of the house, where he used to play as a child, as if using that path of memories could soften my heart. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the insistent knocking on the back door. I took a deep breath, smoothing my apron with trembling hands, and went to answer. When I opened it, I found my son. No, I found a man I barely recognized, with a red face, sweaty, eyes injected with a mixture of desperation and anger that made me instinctively take a step back. Mom, we need to talk, now. He didn't wait to be invited, just pushed the door open and entered, filling the kitchen with his agitated presence. The bank called me. They're accusing me of fraud. You did this? You really went there and accused me? His voice was loud, aggressive, nothing like the gentle boy who used to wake me on Sunday mornings with coffee in bed. I closed the door slowly, maintaining composure. I didn't accuse you, Mark. I just discovered what you tried to do. The bank has its own investigations. He punched the table, making the coffee cups shake. This is ridiculous. I was going to pay it back. I just need money now. It's an emergency. Emergency? I crossed my arms, feeling a strange calm envelope me. What kind of emergency justifies trying to steal from your own mother? What kind of emergency makes you forge documents, saying I'm mentally incapable? I saw something change in his eyes, the mask finally falling completely. You don't understand. I'm drowning in debt. The business I invested in went wrong. I owe dangerous people, and this farm is just sitting here worth a fortune while you live alone in this huge house. So that was it. It wasn't about me or my well-being. It never was. It was about money. It was always about money. Dangerous people? I felt my heart tighten, not for me, but for him. Mark, what have you done? What kind of trouble have you gotten yourself into? For a second, just 1 second, I saw the scared little boy he used to be when he broke something or did something stupid. But then the anger came back, covering any vulnerability. That doesn't matter. What matters is you're my mother, and you should help me. Instead, you change the locks, humiliate me, and now you even accuse me of crimes? He was shouting now, pacing back and forth in the kitchen like a caged animal. I'm your son. You owe me this. Those words, you owe me, were like a slap in the face. I owe you? My voice came out low, dangerously low. Mark, sit down. He hesitated, but something in my tone made him obey, falling heavily into the chair. I sat across from him, placing my hands on the table, firm and visible. I'm going to tell you what I owe you. Nothing. Absolutely nothing beyond the love I've already given my entire life. I saw him open his mouth to protest, but I raised my hand. No, Now you're going to listen to me. For the first time in a long time, you're really going to listen to me. When your father died, you were 15. I was 38. Remember how hard it was? I saw him swallow hard, jaw clenched. I could have sold this farm then. It was the easiest option. An elderly mother, well, not so elderly at the time, widowed, with 3 children to raise alone. But you know why I didn't sell? Because this land was your father's dream. And because I wanted you to have a home, roots, something solid in a world that had just crumbled. My voice trembled, but I continued. I worked double shifts at school, tutored at night, woke up at 4 in the morning to take care of the animals before you woke up. Mark looked at his own hands, but I knew he was listening. I put you through college, paid every penny of your education. When you wanted to marry Jessica, I gave you the money for the wedding that I'd saved to fix the roof of this house. You know what I did? Lived with leaks for 2 years because your wedding was more important. I felt the tears burning, but didn't let them fall. And when you opened your first business and asked for help, I mortgaged part of the farm to lend you money. Money that, by the way, you never returned. I saw him flinch at that last piece of information. So don't tell me I owe you anything, Mark. Not after everything I gave. Not after all the sacrifices I made. I got up, walking to the window, looking at the fields outside. And you know what hurts most? It's not the money. It was never about money. It's that somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as a bank, as a source of resources, as an obstacle between you and what you want. I turned to face him, and for the first time he was crying, silent tears running down his face. When did I become a useless burden to you? When exactly did your love turn into resentment? He sobbed, covering his face with his hands. Mom, I didn't want to. Things got out of control. His voice was broken, small. I invested in a business that seemed guaranteed. Jessica was pregnant. She lost the baby before telling you, and the medical debts piled up. Then the business failed, and I borrowed money from people I shouldn't have borrowed from. He looked at me with red, desperate eyes. I have 2 weeks to pay, or they're going to. I don't know what they'll do, but I'm terrified. And I look at this huge farm and think, here's the solution. Why is she so attached to this place? Because it's my home, Mark, I said simply. Because every tree here has a story. Because your father is buried there in the garden, under that cherry tree we planted together. Because it's all I have left of a life I built with love and sweat. I sat again, softer this time. And yes, I understand you're desperate. But desperate doesn't justify trying to steal from me, defame me, destroy me. I grabbed the folder with the bank documents that was on the counter and placed it on the table between us. This is attempted fraud, federal crime. You could go to prison. I saw panic take over his face. Mom, please, I was desperate. I wasn't thinking straight. Jessica said it was the only solution, and I stopped him. Jessica, of course, your gold-digger daughter-in-law convinced you that stealing from your own mother was the solution. I sighed, feeling the weight of all this on my shoulders. Mark, I'm going to make you an offer, one single offer, and you're going to listen carefully because there won't be a second chance. He straightened in the chair, grasping at any hope. I'm going to lend you the money you need, not give, lend, with a contract, interest, and payment deadline. But there are conditions, I continued before he could speak. First, you're going to seek help, therapy, financial counseling, whatever's necessary. Second, Jessica can't have access to this money. It's between you and me. Third, you'll never, ever try to manipulate, control, or disrespect me again. One single word out of place, and the deal ends. I looked deeply into his eyes. And fourth, you're going to rebuild trust step by step. It won't be easy. It might take years. But if you really want to be my son again, you'll have to prove it. With actions, not words. Mark was crying openly now, shaking his head. I accept everything. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I raised my hand. No, not now. Empty apologies mean nothing. Show me you've changed. Show me that boy who wrote letters promising to take care of me still exists somewhere inside you. I got up, indicating the conversation was over. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock, at Mr. Thompson's office. We'll sign the contracts. And Mark? He looked at me, vulnerable and broken. If you break this agreement, I won't hesitate to sue. Mother or not, I protect myself now. He left through the same door he entered, hunched over, as if carrying the weight of the world. And maybe he was. I closed the door and leaned against it, finally letting the tears fall. They weren't tears of weakness, they were of liberation. Because for the first time, I'd set clear boundaries. I'd respected myself. And although my heart still ached for this emotional story I was living, I knew I'd done what needed to be done. I'd been a mother, but I'd also been a woman. I'd loved, but I'd also protected myself. And in some strange way, that made me feel whole again. 3 days passed since that confrontation in the kitchen. 3 days of heavy silence, of waiting to see if Mark would really show up at the lawyer's office, of questioning if I'd made the right choice. I was on the porch, having my afternoon tea, and watching the clouds form on the horizon, when I heard the sound of a car in the driveway. My heart raced. Was it Mark coming back to argue? Was it Jessica coming to confront me? But when I looked, I saw a car I hadn't seen in months. My daughter Lily's small red sedan. She got out hurriedly, carrying a suitcase, and even from afar, I could see her face was marked by determination and something more. Shame, perhaps. I got up slowly, holding the cup with both hands, not quite knowing what to expect. Lily had kept her distance during this whole situation, hadn't defended me at dinner, hadn't called afterward. Part of me was hurt by her, but another part understood. She'd always been the family peacemaker, the one who avoided conflicts at all costs. When she climbed the porch steps, our eyes met, and I saw tears running down her face. "Mom, I'm so sorry, so sorry." Her voice broke and she dropped the suitcase, running to hug me with a strength that caught me by surprise. I stayed rigid for a second, still protecting my heart. But then I felt my daughter trembling in my arms, and something inside me melted. "Lily," I whispered, finally returning the hug. "I should have defended you that night, should have put Mark in his place right then. But I was afraid. I was a coward. And I've been living with this guilt every day since." She pulled back, holding my shoulders, looking into my eyes with an intensity I rarely saw in her. "Mark told me everything. About the fraudulent loan, about the plans to sell the farm, about how he treated you. Mom, I didn't know it had gotten to that point." I led her inside, making tea as I always did when my children needed to talk. We sat at the kitchen table, that same one where Mark had yelled at me days ago, but now the atmosphere was completely different. Lily held the cup with both hands, as she used to do when she was little and nervous. I knew Mark was having financial problems, but I thought it was just a difficult phase. I never imagined he'd be capable of doing what he did. She shook her head, visibly disturbed. "And Jessica, I never really liked her, but I never thought she'd be so calculating, so cold. Why did you come, Lily? Not that I'm not happy to see you, but..." I left the question hanging. She took a deep breath, as if preparing for something important. "I came because you shouldn't be alone. I came because I realized we all treated you as a given, as if you'd always be here, always available, always ready to save us from our own mistakes." New tears began to fall. "And I came because I don't want to be like Mark. I don't want to wake up in 10 years and realize I lost my mother because I was too busy with my own life to notice she needed me." She pointed to the suitcase she'd left on the porch. "I want to live here, with you, if you'll have me." I stayed silent, processing those words. Lily, live with me? My youngest daughter, who had her own life, her own apartment in the city? "Lily, you don't have to do this out of pity or guilt," I began, but she interrupted me with a firm gesture. "It's not pity, Mom, and it's not just guilt, although I have plenty of that. It's because I really want to. My apartment is empty, cold. I work from home most of the time, and this farm has always been my favorite place in the world. I just distanced myself because Mark was always here, always dominating the space, and I didn't want to deal with the tension." She took my hand across the table. "Let me stay, please." I squeezed her hand, feeling something inside my chest warm up for the first time in weeks. It wasn't just relief, it was hope. "You're always welcome here, dear. Always have been." Lily smiled through the tears, and the two of us just stayed there, holding hands in a comfortable silence that spoke more than 1,000 words. This real story was taking a turn I didn't expect. In the midst of so much pain and betrayal, I was finding reconnection and true love. Who would have thought that so much total humiliation could eventually bring something good? That night, I helped Lily settle into the room that used to be hers as a child. It still had some of her old posters on the walls, the faded comforter she loved, the bookshelf full of books she never wanted to take with her. "It's exactly how I remembered," she said softly, running her hand over the wooden dresser. "I never changed anything," I admitted. "I always kept your rooms ready in case you wanted to come back." She looked at me with that expression mothers know, a mixture of love, gratitude, and sadness for lost time. "Does Mark still have his room intact too?" I nodded, but I don't know if he's still welcome in it. Lily sat on the bed, making the mattress creak like in the old days. "Mom, can I ask you something?" I sat beside her. "Of course." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Are you really going to lend Mark money? After everything?" I sighed, looking at my hands worn by time and work. "I am. Not because he deserves it, but because I'm still a mother. And mothers don't completely give up, even when they should. But it'll be different now. There'll be limits, consequences, rules." Lily nodded, thoughtful. "And if he doesn't follow through with the agreement, then I'll do what I promised. I'll sue, and I'll survive." "You've changed, Mom," Lily said softly. "In a good way. You seem more strong, more yourself." Her words caught me by surprise. Had I changed? Or had I just finally allowed the woman I'd always been on the inside to show on the outside? "Your father used to say I was too strong sometimes," I shared, a distant memory surfacing. "He said I could move mountains when I decided to." I think I'd just forgotten that over the years, got lost in the role of mother and forgot the role of Evelyn. Lily smiled. "Well, it's good to have Evelyn back. I missed her." That night, we did something we hadn't done in years. We had dinner together on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Lily told me about her work as a graphic designer, about relationships that didn't work out, about dreams she'd put aside. And I shared things I'd never said before, about how the loneliness after her father's death was devastating, about how raising 3 children alone had been the hardest and most rewarding thing I'd ever done, about how I felt invisible sometimes in my own family. It was as if we could finally be honest with each other, without roles or expectations. "Mom, what's going to happen when Mark comes tomorrow to sign the contracts?" Lily asked as we washed dishes together. "I don't know," I admitted, "but whatever it is, at least now I'm not alone to face it." I looked at my daughter, at this young woman who'd chosen to stay by my side, and felt a deep gratitude. Mark might be my ungrateful son, but Lily was proving to be a daughter who understood the value of family, of respect, of true love, and that, by itself, was already a victory amidst so much chaos. When we finally went up to sleep, Lily stopped at my bedroom door. "Good night, Mom, and thank you for letting me stay." I smiled, touching her face gently. "Thank you for choosing to stay. It makes all the difference." She kissed me on the forehead and went to her room, leaving the door ajar as she did when she was a child, wanting to know I was near. I lay in my bed, looking at the ceiling, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. Yes, things with Mark were still complicated. Yes, there was still a lot of pain to process, but Lily was here. I wasn't alone anymore, and this emotional story was teaching me that sometimes, in the middle of the storm, we find anchors in the most unexpected places. The morning of the meeting at the lawyer's office dawned gray and cold, as if the sky itself reflected the tension I felt. Lily insisted on going with me, and I confess her presence gave me a courage I didn't know I needed. We drove in silence, just the sound of the radio playing softly, and the noise of tires on wet asphalt filling the space. When we arrived, Mark's car was already parked there, but he wasn't inside. I saw my daughter squeeze my hand quickly before we got out, a simple gesture that meant, "I'm here with you." I took a deep breath, and we entered the building, climbing the stairs that seemed longer than normal. Mr. Thompson received us with his usual professional seriousness, but I noticed a look of approval when he saw Lily by my side. Mark was already sitting in one of the chairs, and honestly, I didn't recognize him for a second. He was thin, pale, with deep dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights. He wasn't wearing his usual impeccable suit, just a wrinkled shirt and jeans. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away, like a child caught doing something wrong. Jessica wasn't with him, I immediately noticed. That gold-digger daughter-in-law had been smart enough to stay away from this situation. "Good morning, everyone," Mr. Thompson began, organizing papers on the table. "We're here today to formalize a loan agreement between Evelyn Parker and Mark Parker, under specific terms that were previously agreed upon." He started reading the terms, and with each word I saw Mark shrink more in his chair. $50,000, 5% annual interest, monthly payments starting in 3 months, termination clauses in case of non-compliance. It was all very formal, very cold, very different from how we used to do things in the family. But family, I was learning, also needed clear boundaries. There's also an additional clause, Mr. Thompson continued, looking at Mark over his glasses. Mrs. Parker inserted a condition that Mark Parker must provide monthly proof that he's receiving professional counseling, whether psychological therapy or financial counseling, during the entire loan period. I saw Mark swallow hard, but he nodded. I agree with everything. His voice came out hoarse, low. The lawyer pushed the papers in our direction. Then let's sign. I grabbed the pen, my hand surprisingly steady, and signed my name. Mark did the same, his signature shaky and uneven. After the documents were signed and witnessed, Mr. Thompson discreetly left the room to get copies, giving us a moment of privacy. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Lily looked at her brother with an expression mixing disappointment and pity. I just waited. I wasn't going to be the one to break that silence. Finally, Mark let out a trembling sigh, and to my surprise, his tears began to fall freely, without control. Mom, he stopped, covering his face with his hands. I have no excuse. I have no explanation that justifies what I did. I simply got lost. I got lost in the pride of being the oldest son, of having to be successful, of having to prove something. He continued, his voice muffled by his hands. When the business started going wrong, instead of asking for help, I tried to hide it. Jessica kept pressuring me, saying I was weak, that my father never would have failed like that I was embarrassing the family. He finally took his hands off his face, looking at me with red, swollen eyes. And the more she talked, the more I believed it. I started to see you not as my mother, but as proof of my failure. You alone managed to keep this farm, raise 3 children, survive. And I couldn't even keep a business running. So I started blaming you, he confessed, each word seeming to be torn from inside him with pain. I blamed you for being too strong, for making me look weak in comparison. I blamed you for having this farm that was worth so much when I was desperate. And at Thanksgiving dinner, when Jessica whispered in my ear that if I made you seem incapable, it would be easier to get the property, he stopped, a sob escaping. I said those horrible words. I saw the pain on your face and did nothing, because in the moment, all I could see was the solution to my problems, not the person I was destroying. Lily made a disgusted sound beside me. Mark, do you realize how sick this is? How you let that woman manipulate you to the point of humiliating your own mother? He looked at his sister, shrinking even more. I know, Lily. And I broke up with Jessica 3 days ago. When I told her Mom was going to lend the money but with conditions, you know what she said? His voice was bitter now. She said I was pathetic, that I should have more guts to simply take what was mine by right, and that she wasn't going to stay with a failure like me. He gave a humorless laugh. And you know the worst part? It was liberating to hear that, because I finally saw who she really was. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me, Mark said, finally looking directly at me for the first time since we arrived. I don't expect you to trust me again. I broke something between us that maybe can never be completely fixed. He wiped his tears with his shirt sleeve, that childish gesture he used to make when he was little. But I want you to know that it wasn't your fault. You didn't fail as a mother. You never failed. I was the one who failed as a son. I was the one who forgot what family means, what gratitude means, what true love means. His voice broke again, and I feel ashamed, so ashamed of who I became. I stayed silent for a long moment, letting his words settle in the air between us. Part of me wanted to run and hug him, tell him everything was okay, that he was forgiven. It was maternal instinct, that voice that always put my children's well-being above my own. But there was another part of me now, stronger, wiser, that knew easy forgiveness wouldn't teach anything. Mark, I began, my voice calm but firm. I heard you. I heard your pain, your shame, your regret, and I believe they're genuine. But you need to understand that words are just words. This emotional story we're living doesn't end here with an apology. Forgiveness isn't something I can simply give because you cried or because you acknowledged your mistakes, I continued, watching him nod slowly. Forgiveness is something that'll be built over time, with consistent actions, with real changes. You're gonna have to prove, day after day, that you've learned, that you've changed, that the ungrateful son who humiliated me in front of the whole family died, and a better man is trying to be born in his place. I took a deep breath. And even then, even if you do everything right, there might be scars that never heal completely. You need to be prepared for that possibility. Mark nodded vigorously, tears still flowing. I accept it. I accept everything. Just give me a chance. A single chance to prove I can be better. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and looked at my son, this broken and regretful man who was once my baby. You've got your chance, Mark, but you won't waste it, because there won't be another one. I extended my hand formally, not offering a hug, but a handshake like in a business agreement. He looked at my extended hand, understanding the symbolism, and shook it firmly. It was a beginning. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't complete forgiveness, but it was a beginning. When we left the office, Lily put her arm through mine. You were perfect in there, Mom. Firm, but fair. I looked back and saw Mark standing in the parking lot, looking at the papers in his hand, alone with his regret and his choices. I felt a pang of maternal pain, that urge to go back and comfort him. But I didn't go back, because sometimes true love means letting people face the consequences of their actions. It means establishing boundaries even when it hurts. It means choosing your own well-being without guilt. And as we drove back home, the farm waiting for us on the horizon, I understood that this elderly mother had learned one of life's hardest lessons, that you can love someone deeply and still protect yourself from them. 6 months passed since that day at the lawyer's office. 6 months of cautious silences, small gestures, slow but noticeable changes. Mark showed up every first Saturday of the month to personally deliver the loan payment, always by check, always accompanied by the therapy receipts the agreement required. He never entered without being invited, always waited on the porch until I opened the door, always treated me with an almost formal respect that, although painful, was necessary. Lily continued living with me, and her presence had transformed the farm into a home again, filling the silence with laughter, conversations, and that energy only young people can bring. It was on a spring Saturday, when the flowers I'd planted with my late husband were starting to bloom, that Mark arrived different. I can't explain exactly what it was, but there was something lighter on his shoulders, something clearer in his eyes. Lily was in town shopping, so it was just the two of us when he climbed the porch steps, holding the monthly envelope and something else, an old leather folder I recognized immediately. It was his father's folder, the one he'd given Mark when he graduated from college. Mom, can we talk? Really talk? His voice was different, more mature, more present. I made lemonade, that recipe I'd been making since they were little, and we sat in the rocking chairs on the porch, watching the green field stretch to the horizon. For a moment, we just rocked in silence, the rhythmic creaking of the chairs creating a familiar melody. I brought this, Mark finally said, opening the folder. Inside were papers, photos, letters. Remember when you found that box in the attic with my childhood letters? I nodded, the memory still painful. Well, I've been keeping things too. Things Dad left for me, advice he wrote before he died. He pulled out a yellowed letter with my husband's unmistakable handwriting. I'd never read all of them, Mark admitted, his voice trembling slightly. It was too painful. But in therapy, my psychologist suggested I read them, that I really process what Dad wanted to tell me. He handed me the letter. Read it to me? I need to hear it from you. I took the paper with trembling hands, instantly recognizing the words of the man I'd loved my whole life. I began to read. My son, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to guide you personally. But I want you to know something important. Being a man doesn't mean never failing. It means getting up when you fall. And it means, above all, honoring those who raised you. I continued, my voice breaking at times. Your mother is the strongest woman I've ever known. She'll need you when I'm no longer here. Not to solve problems for her, she's perfectly capable of that, but to be by her side, to remind her she's not alone. Mark, promise me you'll take care of your mother, not as a burden, but as the treasure she is. And if someday you get lost along the way, if you forget who you really are, come back to the farm, come back to her, because your roots are there, and roots always bring us back home. I finished the letter with tears flowing freely down my face. Mark was crying too, but these were different tears from the ones he'd shed months ago. These were cleaner, more healing. I broke that promise, Mom. Broke it in the worst possible way. He looked at me, vulnerable but honest. But I want to fix it. Not just pay back a loan or fulfill an agreement. I want to really become your son again. Not the ungrateful son who humiliated you, but the son Dad believed I could be. He pulled something from his pocket, a shiny new key. I had this made. I'm not asking you to give me a key to your house. I'm giving you the key to my new house. I took the key, confused. Your new house? Mark nodded. I sold the apartment where I lived with Jessica. It was full of bad memories, worse decisions. I bought a simple little house here in town, 15 minutes from the farm. He smiled shyly. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive, just an honest place where I can start over. And I want you to have a key, not because you need to take care of me, but because I want you to know you're always welcome, that my door is always open to you. The symbolism didn't go unnoticed. I'd changed the locks on my house, closing the door to him, and now he was offering me the key to his, opening the door to me. Mark, I began, but he gently raised his hand. Let me finish, please. He took a deep breath. I got a new job. It's nothing glamorous. Manager at a small accounting firm. But it's honest. It's stable. And I don't stay up at night afraid of losing everything. He looked at the fields. And every week in therapy, I work on understanding how I let ambition and pride transform me into someone I don't even recognize. How I let a toxic woman convince me that manipulating my own mother was acceptable. He paused. Jessica, by the way, got married again, 3 months after we separated, to a man 20 years older and very rich. That gold-digger daughter-in-law showed her true colors until the end, I murmured, and Mark gave a bitter laugh. Yeah, and you know what's funny? I don't feel anything. Not anger, not hurt, just relief. Relief that I got out of that relationship before it destroyed me completely, or before I let her use me to destroy you even more. He looked directly at me. Mom, I know 6 months of good behavior doesn't erase years of neglect and months of cruelty. I know it might take years, maybe a lifetime, to rebuild what I broke, but I'm willing, I'm committed, and not because I owe money or because I have a contract, but because I finally understood. Understood what? I asked softly. That you're not a burden. You never were. You're the foundation, the reason any of us managed to become who we are. And I was so blind, so selfish, so lost in my own problems that I couldn't see that. He took my hand, that simple gesture we hadn't done in so long. So I'm not asking for complete forgiveness. I'm not expecting everything to go back to how it was before. I'm just asking permission to keep trying, to keep proving I can be better, so that one day, maybe, you'll be able to look at me without seeing the pain I caused. I held the key in my hand, feeling its weight, not the physical weight, but the emotional weight of what it represented. A son who finally understood, a man who was really changing, an emotional story that maybe, just maybe, could have a less painful ending than it seemed months ago. Mark, I finally said, choosing my words carefully, a door should only be opened by those who know how to take care of what's on the other side. He looked at me, recognizing the words, waiting. And you're showing, day after day, that you're learning to take care, not just of doors, but of the people behind them. I stood up, putting the key in my apron pocket. I'm not saying everything's perfect. I'm not saying there's no more pain, or that trust is completely restored. I saw him nod, accepting the truth of those words. But I'm saying I see your changes, I see your genuine effort, and although there's still a long road ahead, I'm willing to walk it with you, step by step. No shortcuts, no easy excuses, but together. I extended my hand, and this time it wasn't a formal business handshake. It was an invitation. Mark took it, stood up, and for the first time in months, I allowed him to hug me. The hug was long, silent, full of everything words couldn't express. When we separated, we were both crying, but these were different tears. They were tears of healing, of hope, of possibilities. Thank you, Mom, he whispered, for not giving up on me, even when I deserved it. Mothers don't give up, Mark, I replied, but they also don't allow themselves to be disrespected anymore. That's the new agreement. He smiled, a genuine smile I hadn't seen in years. Fair. At that moment, Lily arrived from town, getting out of the car with shopping bags. When she saw Mark and me on the porch, her face lit up. "Everything okay there?" she shouted. Mark looked at me as if asking permission. I nodded. "Everything's fine, Lily. Actually, I was thinking, how about we have dinner together? Nothing fancy, just family." Lily dropped the bags and ran to the porch, hugging both of us in a spontaneous group hug. And there, on that porch where so many memories had been created, where so much pain had been lived, where so much total humiliation had happened, we were creating a new memory. A memory of new beginnings, of healthy boundaries, of love that survives even when tested to its limits. This elderly mother had learned that protecting herself didn't mean stopping loving. It meant loving with wisdom. That night, we prepared dinner together, the three of us working in the kitchen like we used to, but with a different, more respectful, more balanced dynamic. Mark didn't take command like he used to. Lily didn't avoid conflicts by staying invisible. And I didn't sacrifice myself to ensure everyone's comfort. We simply existed together, each contributing, each respecting the other's space. And when we sat at the table, not in the formal dining room where that terrible Thanksgiving dinner happened, but at the cozy kitchen table, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace of naivety, but the peace of wisdom. The peace of someone who survived the storm and found solid ground on the other side. And so, at that simple kitchen table, with my children around me and the key to Mark's new house in my pocket, I understood that pain had transformed into something greater, into healthy boundaries, mutual respect, a second chance built on stronger foundations. Not every story of humiliation ends in abandonment. Sometimes, when we have the courage to protect ourselves, to demand the respect we deserve, we open the way for true reconciliation, not based on obligation or guilt, but on genuine love and real change. And you, have you gone through something similar? Have you had to establish painful boundaries with people you love? What would you do if you were in Evelyn's place? Would you forgive or keep your distance forever? If this real story touched your heart, if you saw a bit of yourself in this journey of pain and overcoming, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss other emotional stories that bring life lessons and make us reflect on our own choices and relationships, because sometimes other people's stories help us better understand our own. I'll see you in the next story. See you soon.